another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we are looking at why raising minimum wage is a tax on the middle class. So, when we talk about minimum wage, we are normally talking about trying to help people who are what would be considered lower class. Normally, the way that we look at this is that there are wealthy Americans. You'll hear a lot of people talk about the top 1% or the top 100 earners in the country or something else like that. And then there's the middle class in the middle. But the issue is that we need to try to help these people with minimum wage jobs to get more money. And so the solution to that is to raise the minimum wage. In other words, if we make sure that their paychecks are bigger, then that should help the lower class people to be more like the middle class people, and that is getting them closer to the top 1%. The other idea here is that that is going to come out of the profit margin of the top 1%. In other words, basically, we're going to force them to pay more money to the minimum wage people, and to do that, they're going to have to take less money. The question that this video is going to raise is, in real life, is that really the opportunity cost? In other words, do the top 1% really just choose to give up profits in order to raise the minimum wage? And this video is going to argue no, they do not. Now, the reality is that those people are not giving up money. They have stores, and the stores employ the people. And so when we add a minimum wage to people's requirement, basically what we are doing is we are increasing the cost of production. We talked about that in another video. Wages that are paid or salary that is paid is definitely a part of the cost of production for operating a store. And so that makes the profit margin go down. But if the people running the store, in other words, the top 1%, just increase the product price, that gets rid of the decrease in the profit margin, which means that that's one way that they can just kind of offset this, which means that they're getting the same amount of money. The other thing they can do is just fire people who are working for them. In other words, if I have to double the amount of money that I pay in minimum wage, I just hire half as many people and make them work harder. And so that's another way that those businesses would offset it. So either way, basically what we're talking about is if we raise the minimum wage to help the lower class, but half of them get fired, well, that's going to decrease their standard of living. Now, instead of a small paycheck, they have no paycheck. The other option is to go ahead and decrease the amount of money, the standard of living, because now the things that they buy at the store that they work in are more expensive. And so their minimum wage raise is being offset by a fact that now everything that they buy in that store is more expensive, and they're basically paying for their own raise. Now, that's not one for one, which means that the reality is that they have an option of having a small net gain. In other words, the standard of living is not totally offset by the raise in the minimum wage. So the people that, let's say just South Carolina, if you go from $7.60 an hour in 2021 to $15 an hour, you are not going to pay all of that back, which means that your standard of living is going to overall go up, just not as much as you expect it would. However, if your employer fires you, your standard of living goes down below what it was before. And so we're not going to see nearly the gains in the lower class that we expected. There is no change to the upper class because basically he's making the adjustments, or she is making the adjustments at the price level of their store or at the operations level of their store to ensure that the profit margin remains identical to what it was before. Well, how does this impact the middle class? Two ways. Firstly, they have small businesses, and those small businesses count on minimum wage employees a lot of times, which means that their cost of production goes up, the same as the larger stores does. The problem is that if you look at the overall relative expenses in a small business versus, say, Walmart, the salary and the numbers that we're talking about are just much smaller in a small business, which means that the minimum wage is going to have a much larger effect on the overall cost of production than it would be at a box store. And that's going to mean that the small business cannot compete. So one of the effects of raising the minimum wage is you're actually going to put people who have small businesses competing with larger businesses out of business, which would actually benefit the people owning the big business, because then they would have less competition, which means that they have more control over their prices. They don't have to be competitive with their prices, and they can actually raise prices more, increase their profit margins, and make more money, which means that the minimum wage may, in some sectors of our economy, actually benefit wealthy Americans more than having no minimum wage or a lower minimum wage. The other one is the standard of living decrease that is going to happen by having to buy more expensive items. Do you really think that Jeff Bezos shops at Amazon? Probably only if he really feels like it, but not because he normally does. The Walton family does not buy their clothing from Walmart. Probably. And if they do, they're not doing it because they're counting on it, which means they're not shopping at the stores where people make minimum wage anyway. They're not driving through Chick-fil-A to get their lunch, which means that when you raise the minimum wage, their cost of production of the things that they're buying is going to stay the same. The sales representative at the Gucci store in South Park Mall is not going to change all that much, because those people aren't making minimum wage to begin with. And so basically it ends up that, yes, it's going to work out a little bit for the people in the lower class who are making double the money, and that's offset somewhat by their stuff getting more expensive, but not totally. It's going to work out big time for the big business owners, which doesn't seem like it should be right. That's definitely not the way we normally talk about this decision, but that's what ends up happening. It is not going to work out for the people who lose their jobs. If the businesses make a decision to just operate with less people or to buy machines, for example, Walmart, well, let's just buy more automatic machines, that one person can kind of stand behind the podium and run 20 checkout lines instead of paying people. It doesn't matter that it's slower. It's cheaper for the company, and so that's what they're going to do. And it's also not going to work out for the middle class, which is actually, ironically, at least the way that I'm arguing it here, if our goal is to bring overall society closer to the 1%, by bringing them down a little bit closer to the middle class and by bringing the lower class up a little bit closer to the middle class, what's actually going to end up happening is the opposite. The wealthy Americans, if we raise the minimum wage, are going to actually be further away from the middle class, because the middle class moves down. And in some cases, like I said, they may actually move up when they lose the competition from smaller businesses. So that's the economic realities of the minimum wage and what happens. Obviously, there are some other policies that you can do, talking about price controls and other things like that, but that's a topic for another day. That's it for this video. Hope you have a good day.